as well. So he's really a longstanding connection to Omaha. So after Creighton, he went on to Florida State University, where he earned his master's and PhD, and then postdoctoral training at University of Michigan in the Department of Pathology, Immunology, and Laboratory Medicine. Oh, that's your next position. At University of Florida, as a faculty member, he joined University of Florida Pathology, Immunology, and Laboratory Medicine in 1991, and initially engaged in very basic immunology research, studying the B-cell and T-cell receptor genes, and then kind of transitioned more to preclinical studies in vitiligo, and then moved even more to the dark side, I guess you can say, right? To education research, right? Into education research. And over that time, also got more and more involved in administration and graduate education, doing everything from program planning, curriculum development, program director, recruitment and admissions, program evaluation, and multiple levels of graduate education leadership. And he currently directs the University of Florida pre-doctoral program in clinical and translational science, and their clinical and translational science award, the CTSA TL1 training grant, and is the co-director of the MD PhD program. He has held leadership positions in the AAMC, team-based learning collaborative, the CTSA consortium, and he's currently the president of the International Network for the Science of Team Science. And his current research is focused in that area, team science and translational science training, competency-based assessment, and peer assessment of humanism and medical education. So his focus today is building competencies for team science. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Karen. Let me make sure the microphone is on. Okay, should be.
Is it bright green?
No, but he checked the battery, so it should be
Does
good.
it sound like it's on?
All right.
Yep.
So yeah, thank you for the invitation to come. When Dr. Gold reached out to me about this, and I was like, do you want to do this by Zoom or in person? And I was really hoping she would say in person so I could come back and visit. And the other story I'll tell you is my interest in health sciences actually started at UNMC. When I was either a freshman or a sophomore in high school, they had a medical explorers program. So it was a youth program to get kids interested in medicine. So I was the science nerd, little kid growing up and interested in biology and bugs and everything. But this is what really got me interested in health. So, UNMC, there you go. And as Karen said, high school and college, and I come back every 10 years for my high school reunion. So it's wonderful to come back and visit. Hi to everyone on Zoom. I can't see you, but I know you're there. Please feel free to unmute and throw out an answer to any of the questions that I'm gonna have for the group along the way. So I really welcome the opportunity to tell you about some of the work that we're doing. There we go, fell asleep. Maybe
Is
not.
it moving?
Yeah, it worked. It worked earlier.
I think we just need to get your mouse is back here.
Some fell asleep. There we go. All right. So here's an outline of what I'd like to discuss with you. I'll give you kind of a quick overview about the science of team science. What do we mean by that term, the science of team science? And I'll spend more time on that tomorrow when I do the lunch and learn with the students. I'll share with you a quick review of some of the competency models from the team science literature, and then we'll talk about how we might use competencies to guide learning, especially at the graduate education level. And then I'll kind of broaden the scope a little bit and tell you about some of the work that we're doing in the CTSA consortium to develop more of an integrated model of competency-based assessment for translational science, which does include team science. So let's start with the science of team science overview. And I know I can't see people on Zoom, but for the people in the room, by show of hands, how many of you on a research team? And usually every hand goes up, okay? Good. How many of you do interdisciplinary research? Hands, most hands are up, okay. How many of you do multidisciplinary research? Okay, most hands are up, and there was a maybe. How many of you do transdisciplinary research? And here's
We'll
where
get to definitions.
definitions, we'll get there.
Yeah.
And this is where I always get confused looks,
Yeah, right,
okay?
that's why.
Yeah. How many of you knew there was a difference between those three terms? It's like, you knew.
We covered it in med school.
Awesome. How many of you have experienced a good collaboration? I'm glad to see most hands are up. Real quick, why do you think it was a good collaboration? Throw out just one idea. Why was it a good collaboration in your mind? Trust, something different.
Communication.
I'm sorry,
Follow through.
follow through,
Communication.
communication,
Complementary skills.
okay? How many of you have experienced a bad collaboration? I think it was the same number of hands. Without mentioning any names, why would you consider it was a bad collaboration?
I'll steal the one, lack of follow,
Lack of follow through,
ghosting in
Flakiness.
current terms.
yeah,
Yeah, flakiness.
flakiness. Sometimes people will say, well, the opposite of everything people just said for a good collaboration. So ask anybody, any of your colleagues, they'll say, well, team science, that collaboration, I mean, I've been doing that for decades and we always collaborate. But here's the problem. Not every collaboration is good. And here's where there's room for improvement. And this is where the science of team science comes in. It's how can we make our collaborations better so we can do better science and have more impact on health. So is team science the same as collaboration? Yes, but it is so much more. So team science goes beyond collaboration. Collaboration is influencing the way we do science, especially when you're talking about cross-disciplinary collaboration, because most, one of the phrases I've learned is wicked problems, really difficult problems, whether it's in the environment or in healthcare, really difficult problems cannot be solved within the silo of our own discipline. We have to be talking to people in other disciplines to solve them. So I have a quote for you from Science Magazine, and I want you to look at this quote and identify 2 challenges to collaborating with people in other disciplines. The interdisciplinary approach is becoming one of the prominent characteristics of science and represents a synthesizing trend which focuses specialized research techniques on problems common to a number of separate disciplines. Such cooperative research has to overcome serious obstacles when operating within existing departmentalized framework of universities. It appears that real progress in this direction will be made in institutions that are organized on a permanent and frankly cooperative basis. Psychologically, interdisciplinary research requires not only abstract theoretical intelligence, but also social intelligence. Cooperative work is a social art and has to be practiced with patience. So what are the 2 big challenges here for collaborating across disciplines? What do you see?
One is the middle paragraph, promotion and tenure.
Yep. So that
What do you get credit for?
departmentalized framework, and what's the other one?
Personalities.
Yeah, this was one paragraph, and I split it up to make it easier
Yeah.
to spot these. So these are huge challenges. The problems of infrastructure, and those are both tangible and tacit, and then there's the problems of interaction. So the way we structure our universities, we have departments, and how many buildings you have on your campus, and so you're all split up. And even within a single building, heaven forbid, you should go up 2 floors to talk to somebody whose lab is 2 floors up, right? So there's the people right next to us. There are tacit norms. So one of my favorites, I hate this expression, there's, biology and physics and chemistry, you have the hard sciences, but then you have your soft sciences, you have your psychology and your social sciences and all that. But those are still real sciences. If you're a Big Bang Theory fan, I love the line by Sheldon Cooper when he's talking about the geology department. Oh, the rock people. So that lack of respect across disciplines sometimes. But then as you pointed out, exactly, promotion and tenure. So what counts? Primary investigator, first author, last author, right? Principal investigator of the grants. So the contribution of collaborative work is sometimes not recognized as well as it should be. And then, as you mentioned, the problems of interaction, human nature. It's made even more complicated when you're working with people in other disciplines because we have different vocabulary. We have different words to explain exactly the same biological phenomenon sometimes. So we have to break through communication barriers, and then just the patience and social intelligence of just working with people because of just human nature, personalities and that. So why was that quote informative? I'll suggest the first reason is because anybody involved in collaboration has experienced these. But there's another reason that's kind of interesting, and it's not just about what was said, but when it was said. What year do you think that appeared in Science Magazine? Throw out a year.
2012.
2012.
1975.
1975. I was a junior in high school.
I was gonna guess the 70s too.
Okay. Anybody want to go earlier? Hint? Would you believe
Sputnik era.
1944?
Oh, my goodness.
During World War II, Brozick and Keyes. It was one of the first articles that talked about interdisciplinary research. So Brozick and Keyes, Brozick was a psychologist and Keyes was a physiologist, and they were studying the effects of starvation on the human body, both psychologically and physiologically. Keyes is also famous. His wife was a scientist too. They invented K rations. I didn't know K rations were actually named after somebody. They also created what's referred to as the Mediterranean diet. So they were studying the effects of starvation, and their subjects were men who refused, they were conscientious objectors to the draft, and they didn't go fight in the war, so they became human research subjects. But anyway, so they were the first to actually write about the challenges of doing research across collaboration. That was 80 years ago, and we're still faced with some of these challenges. So, is there any hope that we can overcome them? And obviously, I think the answer is yes. And here's why. It's because of the increased emphasis on collaborative research that we need to do to solve the complex problems that we're trying to deal with. And our funding agencies, especially the NIH, are really encouraging us. Some, NOFOs as they're called now, but requests for applications are specifically for collaborative research. And sometimes they even tell us, we want to see people in these different disciplines collaborating. But also importantly is people in academia, industry, policymakers, all these communities are actually studying the process of collaboration as a team activity. So there are people actually looking at collaboration and how can we make it better? And it's led to this new discipline over the last 20 years called the science of team science. So people have been studying teams for decades. Psychologists, social scientists have been studying teams. If you think about mission critical things like flying a jumbo jet, or what happens in an operating room or an emergency room, the teamwork that you need for the best optimal patient outcomes. The military's been studying teamwork, obviously the world of sports, business and manufacturing. They do a lot of research on teams and how to be effective because they want to increase their profit. But over the last 20 years or so, these communities have actually turned their attention to scientific research as a team activity. And we're looking at the behaviors of scientists and things that actually make a difference in how effective we are, how productive we are, how successful we are getting grants and at producing impactful science. So it's really matured into its own area of inquiry. And it's really helping us start to understand how to better coordinate our research teams. And the International Network for the Science of Team Science is just one example. This is a nonprofit scientific society that was created. And it grew out of an annual meeting that was started at the Northwestern University CTSA program. They had a conference called the Science of Team Science. And they said, oh, that was fun, let's meet again next year. And they met again, and then eventually they decided to start this organization. And it's been fun to be a part of that organization for a few years. So let's back up a little bit though. Get some definitions out of the way. So what's a team? Give me a definition of a team.
Group of individuals working toward a common goal.
let's add one thing to that. That's almost perfect. Anybody want to add an adjective in there? And then we'll come to definitions of all those other phrases. The one
Working
addition,
cooperatively.
there you go,
toward a common goal.
interdependently. Okay, so one or more people working interdependently toward a shared common goal or task. The behaviors of groups of people versus teams of people, even though we use the terms interchangeably, there are some distinct differences, and we'll look at those tomorrow. So what about all these terms that I threw out at the beginning? So I'll give you some examples, and I'm going to use an analogy. Hopefully those on Zoom are eating lunch, because my analogy is going to involve fruit. So some research is unidisciplinary. But as an immunologist, I studied originally B cells. Some immunologists study B cells, some study T cells, some study antigen-presenting cells. Some are clinical immunologists. There's a lot of different subdisciplines in immunology. So it's like apples. You got your red apples, your Macintosh, your Fuji. But they're all apples. They taste different, they have different colors, but they're all apples. So there's our unidisciplinary research. Multidisciplinary research would be research that's kind of a combination of different disciplines, but maybe the research is more additive. So we collect some samples, and the geneticist does something with the DNA, and the cell biologist does something with the cells, and we collect our data separately, but then we put it all together and we create a story and we write a paper. But we've really kind of combined things, but we're not really interacting a whole lot. So it's more additive or complementary. We can be doing things independent, but it still involves multiple disciplines. So that's like a bowl of fruit. You reach in and you grab one piece of fruit at a time. So that would be multidisciplinary. Interdisciplinary suggests something that's a little bit more integrated. So there's some interaction. The cell biologist is talking to the physiologist, and there's some influence on experimental design, for example. So it's a more integrated combination of the research, and this would be more like a fruit salad. So you stick a big spoon into there, take a bite, and you're going to get 2 or 3 different kinds of fruit. You can still taste them individually, but there's some integration of that fruit. And then the other term to describe this combination is transdisciplinary. And this would be a much more holistic combination of the research. And some have said that biomedical engineering is an example of some science that grew out of collaboration between engineers and biologists and physiologists. And so it created a whole new discipline because of that unique combination of the science. So what's the fruit analogy here? Somebody always gets this.
Smoothie.
Yeah, there you go. A smoothie. So you get a totally new, unique flavor depending on the combination that you put into your smoothie. Another phrase that I like to use, because sometimes you don't know if it's multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. So a phrase that it is in the literature now is also cross-disciplinary research. So if you don't know where it is, just play it safe and call it cross-disciplinary research. Michelle Bennett from the NIH describes kind of this continuum of the level of interaction and integration, because we have some research that's just investigator driven. You can do a project within your own research group, and some does involve collaboration, but again, it may be more just complementary, additive, multidisciplinary, and then you have some that's really truly integrated, that's more interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary. Is this a decision you have to make what direction you're going to go? No. This is all driven by your research question, right? What does it take to solve the problem that you're trying to solve? Where would I benefit from involving other disciplines? So this isn't like you're picking one path or another. It should be something that is driven by your research question. So I want to share with you just one example of some of the evidence from the team science literature that collaboration is making an impact on the way we do our science. And this came from Brian Nuzzi's group at Northwestern. Again, they use a method called bibliometrics. So they're looking at authorship patterns in publications and also patterns of citations. So how many times papers got cited. They looked at nearly 20 million papers over a period of 50 years and over 2 million patents. And so they're looking at a comparison between solo authored papers and team authored papers. So 2 or more authors would be a team authored paper. And they're looking at all kinds of different disciplines. And look at their conclusion that I underlined. The process of knowledge creation has fundamentally changed in this 50-year period based on this data. So if you look on panel A, just the black line would be 171 different disciplines in science and engineering. And from the mid-50s to the early 2000s, the percentage of papers that were team authored increased from 50% to over 80%. So much more common to see team authored papers as opposed to solo authored papers. And then in panel B, again, just look at the black line. For science and engineering, team size increased from about 1.8 to about 3.6. So more, about doubled the number of authors on papers. So much more of our work is being done in teams. Is teamwork more impactful with our science? So the panel A is the same data we just saw with team size. And then panel E, there are dots for 171 different disciplines, and the dots are looking at a measure they call relative team impact. So with the ratio between how many citations team authored papers get over the average number of citations that solo authored papers get. So if the ratio is greater than 1, team authored papers get more citations, which is, a proxy measure for impact. So over the 50-year period, you can see nearly every one of those dots is above the line for 1. And the black jagged line is the mean value. This is obviously influenced by citing your own work. And if you remove self-citations, it's still 94% of these disciplines have this relative team impact greater than 1. And there's just so much more evidence in the literature about the impact that collaboration is having on our research outcomes. And this just shows the data for social sciences, arts and humanities, and for patents. So it's true across the board.
So does that calculation separated between the research article and the review article, or it was combined?
If I remember right, it was research articles. Yeah.
Other issues, how many solo authored papers are there anymore?
Well, that's the point, right? There aren't as many. Yeah. I mean, I can
For good
think of
reason,
some.
can't do it.
So there's other data in there that actually shows, I didn't include the figure, but they looked at like the first 5 years and the last 5 years and the how many citations papers got. And in the early 5 years, the most citations went to solo authored papers and team authored papers with higher numbers of authors. And that trend disappeared by the late. So, for my generation, the solo authored paper I can think of that got a lot of citations was by Ed Southern, who invented Southern blots, right?
A technique.
A technique. And I think the Lowry protein determination assay, I think that was a solo authored paper that's like the most citations of all time. So there are some examples, but those are rare now. Yeah. So, all right, let's shift gears, and I want to share with you kind of a review. This was kind of fun because I just put this together for this talk. So I've been involved in this work for a few years, but there are a lot of models for team science in the CTSA world because team science is such a big part of translational research. The reason I got interested in this goes back to my involvement with the AAMC Great Group. So I've been affiliated with the Professional Society with the American Association of Medical Colleges. They have a working group of directors of biomedical science PhD programs and also MD PhD program directors and postdoc training directors. And when we did some strategic planning in 2012 or so, when I was chair of the Great Group, this was one of the 3 priorities. We need to identify what are the competencies for a biomedical science trainee, pre-doc, or postdoc. And the problem comes down to the way we train PhD scientists, it's an apprenticeship, right? And how do you know when a graduate student or a postdoc is ready to move on to the next stage of their training? And what we would hear sometimes is, well, I know when I see it, which is really not very satisfying. And I see some smiles because some of you have heard this too. So we really need, I think we would benefit from the competency-based models like our health professional education, colleagues use. So what is a competency? It's the ability to do something successfully or efficiently. So if we can look at our scientist trainees and show that they can do something effectively, shouldn't they be ready to move on? It's not just the amount of time served in a PhD program. So our goal is to identify the required knowledge, skills, and attitudes to do something, whether it's team science, translational science, cancer research, whatever. But I'll argue that a list of competencies is not enough because lists of competencies are a dime a dozen in the literature. They're only useful if they're actually being used. They might be used to help design a program, but more helpful for our trainees, I think it's linking them to formative assessment. And we'll come back to that in just a little bit. So on the team science side, I'm just going to share 4 examples of some descriptions of what are the lists of competencies. I'm going to simplify it to lists of domains of competency because there's a whole lot more competencies than you can reasonably put on a slide and understand. Although I'll dive into some detail on one of these in a moment. So Alice Feasey did her dissertation research trying to identify domains of competency for managing research teams, and she came up with 5 domains. Communication skills, we've already mentioned communication, some personal competence, social competence, we talked about the social skills, shared leadership, and project management. So those were her 5 domains. I was a part of this review of the literature. This was led by Gaetano Lotrecchiano, and we identified 4 domains of competencies, specifically looking at translational research teams. So this was a group of CTSA folks. And the domains we came up with were team communication, facilitating team affect, which has to do with the bonding that happens, the bonds between team members, collaborative problem solving, team leadership, and managing team research. Personal competence isn't there because you'll see in a moment, we actually identified competencies within those 5 domains, some of which were really at the individual level and others were at the team level. Some folks in Galveston and Houston developed a program called Team Maps, looking at methods to advance collaboration. Their 3 domains kind of overlapped. Some of the competencies within each domain kind of fit communication, some fit social competence. So I kind of indicated where the overlaps are. But the 3 domains were awareness and exchange, psychological safety, and adaptation and correction. And then most recently, Alan Brazier and colleagues at the University of Wisconsin looked at the literature to try to find competencies that really were aligned with high performance teams that were doing high impact research. And their 3 domains were openness to transdisciplinary knowledge sharing, having an inclusive environment, and situational leadership. So you can see these are all kind of overlapping, slightly different sometimes in the perspective, but definitely overlapping. I'll take a deeper dive into the work that I did with Lotrecchiano and colleagues. This was a group of people involved with training programs in clinical and translational science. So here were the 5 domains, and we actually identified a number of competencies that were things that we think people are learning at the individual level that fit within these domains. Like just the self-awareness of your own skills and how you fit within your discipline, being open to ideas from other disciplines is the cognitive awareness. And then we identified other competencies that really develop at the team level and involve that interaction with your team. I was struck when I put this together again, because I had looked at the paper in a while, at how many of them fell into that team leadership bucket. We were talking about leadership earlier and how important I think it is. And so theoretically, if we can really help our team members and our teams build these competencies, then their performance will be better, their collaboration will be more successful, and ultimately have more impact on health.
Wait, can I ask you?
Absolutely.
This one, and maybe you'll get to this. I would imagine, thinking about this framework right here, that for some of these skills, sequence matters,
Mhm.
and for others, there's, it can circle
Yeah,
back between individual and team competency back to individual. But, is that something that you'll cover later, or can you?
I'm not gonna talk about it, but our group has been talking about it. And there's all kinds of other nuances here. And if you think about who's on our translational research teams, it's not just PhD scientists. So we actually just published a paper, Angela Mendel is the first author. It's in the Journal of Clinical Translational Science, where we actually looked at this competency model, looking at 3 different constituencies. You have your faculty and your trainees, and then you have clinical research professionals. And that community is spending a lot of time talking about competencies and it's because that's part of their professional growth. And then community members, citizen scientists, and NCATS is, really pushing us to involve community members, not just as participants in our research, but also informing our research. And the way you look at these competencies with those 3 groups is very different. Very different, especially for the community members. We don't need to train them because they're already coming to the table with amazing knowledge and experience oftentimes. So it's going to be different. So we're talking about all those things. We've talked about the sequencing, but we're also talking about different members of the team and how this is going to be different for them.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, practical applications. Wondering, if as people form collaborations, they're probably thinking more about some of the team competencies.
Yes.
And if they don't have the foundation at the individual level,
Yeah.
then I'm guessing that
And
that's.
most of my work is
Not
definitely
well.
at the individual level, and I'll show you the way we're
Okay.
thinking of that.
Okay.
We do need to eventually get to the team level, and there are other CTSA programs, I wish we were one of them, that are actually paying much more attention to the team level. And they're actually going in and they're providing training for teams, and they're providing coaches for teams. And there's actually a growing trend in actually training people to become those coaches, people who are really expert at the science of team science, who can actually be a member of a team and help guide them through some of the difficulties of the planning and the communication and all that. Yeah. So this is the advice I'm going to give the students tomorrow, and I welcome your feedback about this, because if there's not a team science course available, there are lots of opportunities to learn about some of these competencies here at UNMC, I'm sure. The first one, I color-coded these to match here, is just learning about human nature. If you have an opportunity to do a Myers-Briggs assessment, or a DISC profile, or take a test of emotional intelligence like EQI, do that and read what you learn about yourself, your personality, your kind of preferred styles of communicating with other people, things that motivate you. And if you do this with other people and compare, you'll find very interesting differences. And being able to recognize these characteristics in other people will help you kind of understand where they're coming from when they disagree with you. So really look for opportunities to learn about that side of human behavior. And I think of it as kind of like sandpaper to kind of smooth over those rough edges in our interpersonal interactions. So learn about human nature. On the communication skills, I know, medical students get a lot of training when it comes to listening skills, but things like constructive feedback, how to give constructive feedback, how to receive feedback. Sometimes we're not really open to receiving feedback. Conflict management, how do you deal with differences of opinion? And because conflict just means difference. And especially when we're talking about cross-disciplinary research, there's a lot of difference. And difference is strength when it comes to teams. It's a two-edged sword. And that'll be one of my my final comments. The team science tools might be a little bit harder to find. I will give you a resource that is just an amazing resource for this. But you know, things like having written collaboration plans or written authorship agreements. These are some of the tools that you can use to basically agree up front. And these are not things etched in stone. These are things that should evolve with a project. But talk about some of these things that we know can be the source of conflict later on. Collaborative problem solving. On this one, I think experience is a huge part of this one. So every lab is a team, right? Look at your team, think about the behavior within your team, and what can you do to work more effectively together, just within your own lab group. And then think about your collaborations, whether it's within your discipline or with somebody in a different discipline. So don't be afraid to try these things. Leadership, again, I feel very strongly that leadership is something that all of our students and postdocs should be getting training about this, because they're all future leaders of research teams. And I put some names for some resources, things that I think matter. So Leadership Style is a great book by Kuzi and Posner about that, called The Leadership Challenge. Everybody should understand the dynamics of how teams work and the stages of team development they go through. And so the Tuckman model is very helpful for that. And by the way, I don't mind if you take a picture, but I'm going to share a PowerPoint, the PowerPoint by PDF. So just contact Karen or Rhonda, and very happy to share the slides with you. And situational leadership, you saw, was mentioned by Brazier's paper. Hersey and Blanchard from the business world. Situational leadership is an amazing tool for leaders. So to shift gears then back to how can we incorporate this into our training programs? And again, I'm thinking of this in the perspective of PhD, MD, PhD training, postdoc training. The approach we're taking is a milestone approach, recognizing that learning is a developmental process, and we can define stages. We use a model by Dreyfus and Dreyfus, who defined 5 levels of skill acquisition from novice to expert. Competent is in the middle. And what we've done is we've layered stages of training of a PhD scientist onto those 5 levels of skill acquisition. And with the clinical and translational science, we've layered also stages of training for clinician scientists, because not everybody has a PhD who's doing this kind of research. So in the middle is going back to the PhD students, would be a student who's defending their PhD or beginning a postdoc. They should be somewhere in the middle. They should be competent at these skills. And then at the far end, the expert would be that person who's now leading a team. They might be an assistant professor who's starting a lab. They might be somebody in a biotech company who's now leading a research team. They've been on a research team maybe as an early career scientist, but not leading a team. And some of these may be looked at as somewhat aspirational, because sometimes we're never exactly expert at everything, and that's okay. So if we can define stages of development, then we should also be able to write a description of some observable behaviors. So that's what I mean by milestones. What should I see in my student that shows me that they've reached this level of competence? So that's what a milestone is. And the way we envision an assessment tool working is something like this. So if here's a competency, it's been revised, so don't worry about the actual descriptions. But there are 5 milestones there. The labels are not at the top. We don't want people saying, oh, well, she's a 4th-year student, so she must be at this level. This really has to be rooted in the behaviors, observable behaviors. And what we envision this being used, how we envision it being used is as a self-assessment tool, but then also an assessment by a mentor or supervisor. So individually, separately, they're gonna look at this. The student's gonna read that first description and ask themselves, can I do this on a consistent basis day to day? Have I mastered this? Yes. Okay, move to the next one. Am I doing this on a consistent basis? Yes. Go to the next one. Have I mastered this? Do I do this every day? No. Okay. I've reached this level. Everything to the left, if we've written these milestones correctly, we've calibrated them correctly, then we can reach a stage where things to the left, the person has mastered, and things to the right, they're still working on. Maybe they do them sometimes, or they're still developing that level of expertise. But we can find a position. And so the mentor should be doing this individually separately. And then a third party, like a program administrator, can combine the information into some kind of a report. And it might look something like this. So the green dots tell you where the trainee and the mentor agreed, but then there may be some competencies where maybe the faculty member rated them higher. What a great opportunity to reinforce. No, actually, you're doing a pretty good job. So maybe there's somebody who's underconfident in their ability. So, they get a nice pat on the back there. And hopefully the mentors may say, no, you did a fantastic job at Journal Club last week because you explained this neuroscience thing to a bunch of geneticists. So you really focus on behaviors. We want to provide a venue for conversations about skills that matter. On the other hand, there may be some competencies where a trainee is overconfident. So again, an opportunity to have a conversation about, well, I think here's something where there might be some room for improvement, and here's what I think we can do to improve your rating here for your competency level for this. So this is the way we envision it being used. We developed this framework for science PhDs. And what we're doing now is we're adapting that to a much more integrated model for clinical and translational science. And this is being driven by NCATS. So last year, I got approved by NCATS, a new working group in the CTSA program called Translational Science Competency-Based Assessment. And so I'll give you a quick overview of where we're at with that working group project. I have representatives from at least 25 different institutions around the country that are participating in this project. So it's a lot of fun. Phase one of the project is to agree on a list of competency domains and competencies, and we've done that. The slides will show them, we won't go through them. We've reached the point where we're going to be getting feedback from trainees, mentors, program directors about the competencies. Do we have them right? Is there anything missing? And we're not waiting for that. We're forging ahead, and right now we're writing the milestones for each competency. And then the next kind of pilot testing phase will be, do we have them calibrated correctly? On average, our fourth-year PhD students somewhere around level 2 or level 3, for example. And then based on the results of that pilot testing, we'll revise again, and then we'll do a final round of pilot testing where we actually ask trainees and mentors to use it the way we've proposed that it be used, and we'll survey them about usability and feasibility, and then eventually publish this tool. Where are we getting the competencies? They're being driven by this figure, which may be familiar to many of you. So the National Center for Advancing Translational Science has identified, members of NCATS have identified 7 characteristics of a translational scientist. And in the for our T32 and K-12 programs, NCAT says, we want you to train people to be a boundary crosser, a team player. There's our team science, a rigorous researcher, a skilled communicator. And they've also identified a number of translational science principles. These are both scientific and operational principles that should improve the speed and efficiency of translational research. And they actually inform some of these 7 characteristics. So where we're at is we've identified 10 domains that we're using, and 7 of them are aligned with the 7 characteristics of a translational scientist. Team player is right there, front and center in the middle. It turns out that 5 of these overlapped perfectly with this previous framework that I had helped develop for science PhD training, and that's the 5 in the middle. And then we borrowed from that other work 3 other domains because we really wanted to have an assessment tool that was holistic. So we added what we've renamed as ethical researcher, resilient scientist, and research leader, again, bringing in that leadership competency. I'm not going to go through these, but they'll be in the slides, and you're welcome to look through these. And I welcome any feedback that you may have. So we've got a number of competencies for each of these domains. And then here are the 3 that we added to the 7 characteristics. So here's where we're at with the project. We just started to get feedback. we're still working very hard on the milestones. We actually had a workshop at our Translational Science Conference last week in Las Vegas, and we're working on the milestones. We see value in this for a number of reasons. It will help applicants to our programs and our trainees and scholars understand what the expectations are. This is what it means to be a translational scientist, the skills that I should be developing. And it will provide them with a tool for self-assessment that they may continue to use in the future. And it will also provide a tool for mentors to assess their trainees in other ways than you may already have in your program. And we really want this to support productive mentoring conversations. We're actually changing our language, and I'm trying to move away from calling it a competency-based assessment tool and call it a competency-based mentoring tool. We really want this to provide formative feedback and kind of get away from assessment. And then if it's combined with things like curriculum mapping, it can help inform the development of curriculum. If you have a bunch of trainees not reaching a certain level and by a certain time, maybe there's a hole in your curriculum. And you need to come up with an activity that might help in that particular domain. And then ultimately, of course, we hope this helps train the next generation of translational researchers. I'll tell you just a little bit about how we're doing this at the University of Florida in the last few minutes here. We are funded by a training grant from the CTSA. Students typically in first or second year, most of them are second year pre-doc students, apply as teams of 2. So they actually have to find a partner who's working in a different discipline, but on a similar research project. And they're in a different discipline, a different college, a different PhD program, different lab. But they might both be working on diabetes or cancer, but from totally different disciplinary perspectives. It'll be a mentored experience because their mentors have to agree to mentor them as a team if they get selected. And the way we structure the collaboration is we have them identify what we call team-specific aims. So 1 or 2 team-specific aims that represent a collaborative research project, and those team-specific aims get embedded into their dissertation research. So this is why we have them apply early. We actually ask them to apply before they defend their dissertation research proposal. We want these to be in their dissertation. They take ownership of this project. And even after the 2 years of training grant support, they're still collaborating with their partner because they totally own this project. The hardest part is helping them find a prospective partner and create a team. I'm happy to talk about that in more detail later. We have a curriculum for a clinical and translational science PhD program. It's set up as both a co-major for a PhD program. It's not a standalone PhD program like Mayo has. We also have a graduate certificate. Required core curriculum is illustrated here, a translational research course, team science course, RCR, a journal club that really focuses on those translational science principles now, and then a seminar program. And the team science course, here are the topics. I won't read them to you, but the way I teach this course is I share with them what are the principles of team science, what's the evidence from the literature, but more importantly, I should call this applied team science because they all do homework. And if they're one of my CTS teams, every homework assignment is done with their partner. They do take a DISC assessment, an EQ assessment, and we talk about that. They write a vision and mission statement for their research. They write a collaboration plan, an authorship agreement, a team monitoring activity that helps them look at team behaviors. And they write an evaluation plan for how will we be able to judge at the end of our research when we're both ready to graduate that we were successful as a team. And what's happened since we went from supporting individual trainees like virtually every other training grant in the country to teams is we've got a much more diverse trainee population. We're pulling students from all of the University of Florida campus. Anybody who's doing health-related research can be a part of this program. And the network of collaborations has been amazing. This illustrates that the connections across colleges, the thickness of the line is proportional to how many teams had that kind of pairing. And it's really become an intervention in the collaboration network at University of Florida because 2/3 of these teams involve mentors that had not previously collaborated. So we've actually created new collaborations at UF because of this training program. The other third, we're strengthening existing collaborations, and that's perfectly fine too. It's resulted in a few NIH grants and at least one patent application. So that's the quick run through. Hopefully I've been able to share with you some of my perspectives on these things. A few final comments. How do we use team science? The science of team science, just recognize which problems need it. And if it needs a cross-disciplinary approach, then seek out those collaborators, but understand that it requires specific action, that connecting and interaction. So pay attention to the principles of team science. This is not just any activity, it is a team activity. Two or more people working interdependently to that common task or goal. There are skills that you can learn to integrate those across those disciplinary boundaries. And the final thoughts are, teams are made of people. They are intrinsically dysfunctional. And that cross-disciplinarity both strengthens and threatens teams. So you have to pay attention to these skills to work effectively together, anticipate problems. It's an art and a science. It can be learned, but it has to be practiced. So reframe your collaboration, not just as a scientific enterprise, but as a team activity, and pay attention to team behaviors, because that will help you do better science. For resources, this is a PDF freely available online that Michelle Bennett and colleagues wrote when she was at the NCI for their intramural research. That involves a lot of cross-disciplinary collaboration. This is the textbook that I use for my team science course. It's a great, easy read, so I highly encourage everyone, especially the students, to read this. And then the citations that were throughout the PowerPoint presentation are shown here. That's what I got. I'm welcome any other discussion or questions, and anybody on Zoom, if you can unmute, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. And I think I told you we had Michelle Bennett out here for the CTSA. Some people told me recently they had a hard time finding that PDF. But for anybody here, we have lots of copies of it and copies of the book. So just
And
contact.
there's two versions of it.
Yeah,
There are two versions, and so, yeah. Make
But
sure
anyway,
you've
if you
got
can't
that
find it,
version.
just let the IDEA CTR know. And
Yeah.
thank you, Wayne. So I guess my question is, and as Karen readily knows, we've had, mentorship training and some required things. And, as we all know, most of the training isn't from courses and T32s and things like that. It's one-on-one in the mentor's lab. What is best practices to get the mentors to involve the students in the concept of teams? Often for me in the beginning, it was just, I don't get along with that person, this person,
Right.
and it's one-on-one, let's get along, kumbaya. But that's not training in team science. And so when it comes down to it, it's likely not a, wonderful lecture like you've given for the PowerPoints, but what investigators need to do for their lab, which is a team, and then stretching it out to others. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no, I think it is potentially a problem because the mentors have not taken a team science course. And I can't tell you how many times every year, at least one student will say, I wish my mentor had taken this course.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, that's not making it a requirement on our yearly.
I know, we have enough of that.
But who knows? Yeah.
Again, these are skills that I think most faculty kind of pick them up along the way on the job training, but there wasn't anything explicit. And I think we learned by watching our mentors and our role models. So I think just the fact that we can make this a little bit more explicit can help. And in our CTSA program, I have converted the course into a series of faculty development seminars, and we called it the Team Science Academy. I've only offered it 2 times so far. I've also offered it, I've been invited to do it in a kind of abbreviated format for the AAMC, their Mosaic program, and I've done it for one other faculty development program. So it can be adapted. The hard part about the way I do it with students that's hard to do with faculty is the homework assignments. Because to me, hearing a lecture versus actually playing with it and active learning and writing something and getting feedback from your peers about your collaboration plan. To me, that matters more, is that active involvement. So I'm struggling with coming up with a way to adapt it to faculty to really help them practice this. When I asked our case scholars a while back, if I invited you to bring a collaborator with you if you come to the Team Science Academy, would you? And most of them said, yeah. So that might be a solution, is to, and I know some other CTSA programs actually will do this with nascent research teams. So they're getting together, they're gonna write a big U or P award next year, and they will actually do some coaching. And we don't do that, but I know some other programs do. So that would be the other way, the other strategy.
Yeah, I had a very similar type of question, because I think it is a key element, and as you said, a lot of faculty members, they mentor students in the way that they were mentored,
Right.
or sometimes as a reaction to the way they were mentored, but often unconsciously. And because of that apprentice model, right?
Yeah.
That just sort of perpetuates this. And so I think that this is a key element, and I wonder if you can comment on the potential role of productive co-mentoring relationships in kind of solidifying this learning, because it seems to me if you had a mentoring team, essentially, right, that is modeling some of this, and then students have the nuts and bolts, right, from,
Yeah.
as part of their curriculum, they have the opportunity throughout their training to be applying it and observing it
Yeah.
in because of their co-mentors.
So we were actually talking about this last week. If a program were to adopt this kind of a mentoring tool, one thing that could happen is the mentors will learn about the competencies just by simply using the tool, because they're going to be reading these behaviors, and there will be this recognition that's going to occur just by the fact that, so they don't need formal training. We'll write a user guide for it, for just the nuts and bolts of how to use the tool, but they're going to learn about what we think is important for competencies just by using the tool. So that will be one thing that will help. But the other thing, the team mentoring is a really important concept, because we're very intentional in having the CTS teams. But if you think about it, I think a lot of students will tell you that they have more than one mentor. And when it comes to using this mentoring tool, there's probably not one person who is the perfect person who can assess every one of these competencies. So I think the trainees, pre-docs, postdocs, and even early stage investigators should be free to select the right person who can give them feedback about this competency or another. Because, and I think that's especially true in programs that are more preclinical, and because there's just a little bit more isolation there. So anyway, but well, actually, even the ones that are more clinically oriented, if the primary mentor is not as clinically oriented, then somebody else has to assess the more clinically oriented ones. So I think team mentoring is definitely something we need to pay more attention to. And I actually built it into my T32 proposal, that because I have a unique opportunity to look at team mentoring that's structured differently. With most team mentoring, if you say team mentoring and people just think co-mentor or member of my supervisory committee or something like that, or somebody who helps me with one technique. And I have something that's a little
More
bit
integrated,
unique,
yeah.
more integrated. So we're actually going to look at the mentoring styles and skills, and what's the effectiveness of that team mentoring, and what are trainees going to are they going to different mentors for different things? I predict that they are, but nobody's really looked at that. And I can tell you, Chris Fund and folks at NRM are very interested in this. There is, if you look in their toolkit, there's virtually nothing that's competency-based. So they're very interested in seeing a tool like this in their toolkit for mentoring. So I'm working with Chris and her group at Wisconsin to look at the mentor competencies and the team mentoring aspect. Yes, please.
Clinical competencies, one of the pieces that's incorporated, you talked about consistently demonstrates. They also talk about in diverse environments, in multiple, environments. And is that part of your rubric? Is that, I think for a research scientist, that may be quite different, but you can imagine I studied for this and I'm ready to do the following versus I was put on the spot and didn't expect it.
I think for some of the competencies, we've anticipated different audiences or especially on the communication skills. Because the way we kind of sliced and diced communication skills originally with the science PhD competencies was modes of communication, written communication, spoken, posters, oral presentations. But the way we're looking at it with the clinical and translational science is more audiences, because there's communication with other scientists, there's communication with clinicians, communication with patients, community members, funders, policymakers. There's different ways to look at communication. So that, I think that partially addresses the issue with, so I didn't realize the mic, I pulled the mic off. So, so yeah, hopefully there wouldn't be any surprises, but yeah, we're trying to anticipate that.
And with that, and possibly multiple mentors, you may want to add a confidence next to, oh, I'm evaluating this, but I feel really low confidence that I can evaluate this student in this domain, or I feel really high, and then you might be able to lean on one or the other.
Yeah, we've struggled with how to deal with the not applicable or not able to judge. So we're trying to figure out how to incorporate that into a platform. And just to do the pilot testing right now, and just, that was a screenshot from a Qualtrics survey. But, it might work better in a platform like I don't know if you're familiar with the CCDP, customized something career development plan that was developed at Pittsburgh's CTSA, Doris Rubio. It's a trainee self-rating of 10 competencies, but it's more on a Likert scale from low to high. And they're supposed to be able to have a mentor look at it and give them feedback and then develop a plan for improving level of competency. Ratings are okay, but there's so much subjectivity in there. We really wanted to find something that was more rooted in behavior, that might be a little bit more reliable, which is why we went with the milestone approach. But the point being the platform, and how flexible is the platform, and that would be accessible to people. So we're struggling with that right now. People have suggested REDCap. Not everybody has REDCap. It's, a lot of people in the CTSA consortium have REDCap. REDCap also has the advantage of being able to track results longitudinally. So that's a good advantage of REDCap. I'm not expert on REDCap, but I know people who are. So yeah, those are all issues that we're still struggling with, but we have to figure some of them out pretty quick because I want to be doing some pilot testing later this year. So, anybody left on Zoom? Okay, and I don't know if they can unmute and ask questions, but okay.
You can also type in the chat.
Okay.
I'm Andrea Grover. I'm on Zoom. I'm
Hi
at
there.
University of Nebraska at Omaha. I'm working from home today. And I developed a science outputs inventory kind of assessment for citizen science projects. Citizen science is my research specialty. And one of the findings we had along the way is no one person could really evaluate the holistic outputs of a team by themselves. The PIs didn't know about a lot of the nitty gritty. The technicians wouldn't know about some of the high level stuff. And so we found that if we really wanted to do like an effective holistic assessment, we needed to involve multiple parties. And we
Yeah.
tried a couple of different formats. We tried surveys, we tried focus groups, and the focus groups were actually kind of nice in the like helping the team reinforce the value of the work that they were doing and recognize each other for what they contributed. But there's overhead to all of those models. Like every single one of them has its challenges.
Yeah.
Different people, different perspectives on what's occurring. And sort of in relation to that, my doctoral program was interdisciplinary, and we had an evaluation model for doctoral students that was very much on the like team mentorship end.
Mhm.
So until you passed your proposal defense, you had to do an annual review every year in which you had to arrange participation by not only your committee members, but everybody who had been an instructor for a course that you were in that year or a supervisor on a practicum. And if they weren't available to meet in person, they would write a letter to your supervisor to like assess give their take on your progress that year. But I think by having it be sort of a panel approach, there was a lot more of that kind of holistic understanding, and the qualitative aspects came out. Overhead is definitely high on that, but it was also had a secondary benefit of really solidifying the faculty buy-in to the importance of the PhD program and the importance of investing in that. So just
Yeah.
a couple of things I wanted to
Yeah.
share.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to be asking people in the pilot phase about those challenges, because if it's, just too hard to implement and too hard to find the right people, it's just not going to be adopted by many people. The other challenge that we have that you reminded me of is right now we have 46 competencies. That's 230 milestones. That's a lot. And what we will be encouraging people to do is not to sit down and make this an annual activity, check the box, we did our competency-based assessment for the year. What we really will be encouraging people to do is have this be an ongoing conversation. Okay, this quarter, we're going to look at these 3 competencies. So you do your assessment, I'll do mine, we'll get together in 2 weeks and we'll compare notes and we'll chat about it. And then next quarter, we're going to work on these 2 competencies. So just spread it out over time so it can be an ongoing conversation and not too onerous, because 230 milestones to get through is probably too much.
That was more outputs than we were assessing. The way we tried to do it for longitudinal assessment was to take everything that people had kind of mentioned in the first pass and say, are there any updates on this category for this year? Just to reduce the amount of like recall work people had. And that seemed to help a little bit with streamlining it after the first pass, but the first pass was intensive.
Yeah, and I also would not want to see this to be something that was done, you do the entire thing every single year. Doing it 4 or 5 times during PhD training is probably too much. You could maybe go through the whole set, maybe twice, maybe a year or 2 in, and maybe again towards the end of the PhD, maybe once during postdoc training. So we don't want this to be so overburdensome that nobody wants to do it. We'd rather it was something, again, that supports that really helpful, focused mentoring conversation. Thank you for those comments, Andrea. I appreciate that. Anything else?
Well, I've been trying to figure out how to phrase this. It's not a question, it's not a statement, it's somewhat. So the co-mentor thing would be awesome, and I completely see the benefits of that. And I'm just wondering though, what we're seeing in one of the programs on campus is that more and more faculty are turning down being on a committee because they just don't have the time with everything else going on. And I could see a co-mentor wanting to do this, but I have excellent with my own students. I need to focus more attention on that. So I guess the question would be, it would be interesting to find out as this goes forward, how much does faculty time and time availability come back into this?
Yeah. That's something we really want to look at, because I am interested in knowing eventually how many different mentors were asked, and so which competencies or domains did the primary mentor look at? Is there a pattern here? And are there other domains where they always go outside that primary mentor? I think there's going to be some interesting things to learn there. Supervisory committee members are definitely, I think, on the list of people that might be the right person for one domain or another, because the primary mentor, depending on how hands-on they are as a mentor, depending on their mentoring style, they may not be able to judge some of these things. Hopefully they can judge most of them, because they are really focused on research skills. But yeah, it's gonna, as they say, take a village to be able to get good feedback on all of them.
I'd be interested in seeing those statistics as well as.
Yeah, that'll be a few years away. But definitely something that we're talking about. Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you all. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.
I enjoyed it. I'm enjoying my chat with folks like Justin and his students. So, all right.
Thank you so much. Thank you. How's life not being a graduate program
So
director?
I'm going to Colorado for fun.
Yeah, both my family and my wife's family are there.
I know you're not.
Every chance to see my notes.
Nice. What part of Colorado?
In New Larkspur, it's not too far from Colorado Springs or Castle Rock.
My youngest brother lives in Colorado.